Robert Markovich was born August 30th, 1940 in Kraljevo, Serbia to Stanislava and Vukasin Markovich, an Air Force officer for the Royal Yugoslav Air Force. He also has a younger brother, Dan. At present, Robert is a geography and art teacher for Herman Secondary School and has just recently opened a picture framing business, Heritage Gallery, that caters to his artistic side. What about your childhood growing up in Yugoslavia and as well why your parents decided to immigrate to Canada?
Well, I was born during the war. My dad had just been captured by the Germans just before I was born, so I never knew my dad until I met him again here in Canada, which was about 10 years or 11 years. And so the first part of my childhood was during the war, and of course, I still remember some of the bombings and leaving the city at night and going into the countryside and so on. After the war, the communist government took over, and there was a lot of regimentation. There were always soldiers walking around with rifles and everything. So even though I didn't know much about the politics, it was kind of interesting. It was kind of exciting to watch the soldiers walking by and all the equipment and the trucks and the tanks and all that. And it wasn't really until about 2 years before we emigrated that kind of military activity kind of died down, and the country started to go back to a more normal pace. I guess my childhood was pretty much the same as any other kids. One thing was different. School was only half a day. We started at I think it was 8:30, and we'd finish for lunch, but then they piled on the homework, so by the time you got home you probably had about 3-4 hours of homework to make up for the time that you weren't in school. And they were running schools on 2 shifts. One shift would leave, the next shift would come in. So I was a student there until 4th grade, 10 years old. And well, we used to, just roam around, get in trouble, There was always stuff hanging around from the war that was deactivated. Like, for example, close to our house, there was this line of steam engines that was on a siding. There must have been 20 or 30 of them, all shot up with 50 caliber bullet holes everywhere. And we used to get on the steam engines and, play on those and pretend we were drivers. Also with other kinds of equipment. We used to go out into the countryside and collect bugs and flowers and butterflies and have butterfly collections. There wasn't too much in the way of toys after the war, so we kind of made our own fun. We built things and we collected things and we explored, and that's the sort of thing we did.
So then, in comparison to living your life in Serbia and then moving to Canada, how could you make the comparison?
Well, it was really different, of course. In Yugoslavia, I was sort of settled and confident about what my social status and situation was. I was the son of a high school teacher, and my dad, even though he was in prison, he was an officer in the Air Force. So as a child, I had a fair degree of status. When we came to Canada, I couldn't speak English, and I had to adjust to that. And a lot of the kids didn't like foreigners in those days because jobs were difficult in the early 50s. So we kind of had to struggle through that until I learned the language. There were a lot of slurs like, DP, which meant displaced person. And, we had to get into fights once in a while and hold my own. But once I learned the language, then it wasn't so bad. I had to kind of start grade school right from the beginning, and I got skipped through quite a bit.
So speaking of education, then how did you become, or choose your career path as a teacher?
Actually, by accident. After finishing high school, well, actually, I didn't finish high school. I failed grade 11 twice. I was a kind of a troublemaker when I was a teenager, and I joined the Army. So I never did get my grade 11. And after being in the Canadian service for 3 years, I decided that wasn't what I wanted, so I came back to school, and I went to Assumption High School, finished my grade 11, my grade 12, and then went to university. And I completed my Bachelor of Arts in Geography And at that time, there were jobs and teaching everywhere. I mean, you could walk into any school any
Wow.
time of the day, and the job was there. They were out actively recruiting students. But I decided to stay longer, and I ended up getting a master's degree. And I was going to go and teach at university. So I applied for a PhD, and I got it. And at that time, there was a problem with my first marriage, so I kind of let go of that idea, and I went to teachers college, and I ended up teaching in high school. So it was kind of by accident that I got into high school teaching. But as it turns out, it suited me very well. I like teaching for the most part, although it's getting a little bit, different from what it used to be. And the kids are generally pretty good. And I don't find that I have to really get overly uptight about, my role in a classroom or preparing or anything like that. So it suited me very well.
If you didn't choose the teaching, would you have chosen anything else?
Well, I would have chosen teaching at university. So I would have taught anyway.
Right.
But high school ended up being a very good idea because at that time, high school teachers, and I think still, are often paid as much or more in some cases than university professors. So it wasn't that bad an accident.
No, not at all. So tell us any highlights that happened during your teaching career.
Well, I guess the big highlight was I got tired of teaching geography after about 15 years, and I went back to university and finished my art degree, which was always a minor for me, and it was just a hobby. So after I finished my art degree, I started teaching more art than geography, and now I'm almost full-time art, and I teach geography occasionally when I'm needed. So I find that a lot more relaxed and enjoyable, and that's what led me into all of this.
So tell us now about the Heritage Gallery.
Well, the Heritage Gallery is a framing gallery with space for some exhibition, and I got into that because I was doing my own artwork and framing my own artwork, and people heard about it. Friends came over and I framed their work. So I've been doing this for almost a year and a half, 2 years in my basement. So I thought, well, if I'm going to frame for friends, I might as well frame for, make it into a business. So my wife and I, this is my second wife now, my wife and I decided to open up, and we're still, as you can see, in the process of opening.
So tell us now what you intent or about your family and how you did meet your wife and your children.
Well, my first wife and I didn't stay together. I had 2 children out of that marriage, Lori and Kelly. Lori is 24 and Kelly is 21. And Lori is a university graduate in dramatic studies. Kelly is also an artist and a dancer, and she's in Boston right now finishing her degree in those 2 fields. And I expect Lori will be helping me in this because I don't intend to quit teaching. So Lori will be kind of managing the business for a while. After my divorce, a couple of years afterward, I met my second wife, and we went out for almost 20 years.
Oh my God.
Because she had a family, her husband had died. Of course, I had a family, and the kids were young. And even though they got along fairly well, generally speaking, we thought that it might be more prudent to wait until they grew up and kind of set their own directions. So we went out and we had a good time, and we traveled with the kids and without the kids. And finally last year we decided to get married. So it's just over 20 years now that we've been together and 1 year married.
Oh, that's great. So what can you say? Would you change anything about your life? Or
I don't know. I enjoyed everything I did. I made a lot of mistakes like everybody. I suppose if I could change anything, it would be to work more on my temperament, try to, mellow out a little more. But no, I guess I can't say that I would really seriously want to change anything.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time.